newbie investors tend to complain about breaking into real estate because it is the hardest time in their mind to do so. And you've developed a strategy called the onion strategy that helps put this mindset to bed. So tell us a little bit about what the onion strategy is, and let's break it down on today's episode.
I'm not sure if I created the strategy. It's definitely something I've implemented before in the past and done with other students and other members, but
I like that.
I'm not going to call it to mind. What's
yeah,
that?
Yeah, I said, I like that. Being above board. I like that. Yeah.
Okay, so essentially the onion strategy is basically just layers. Has nothing to do with food. Essentially what's happening is that a lot of young folks, primarily younger millennials and Gen Z, is that they are saying that they cannot afford housing inside prime real estate spots. Think about city centers. And that's for as long as I've lived, including my parents, my grandparents' generation, that has always been true. That the prime real estate inside the city centers is just really difficult. We call that the core of the onion. And so the strategy, what it is that you start drawing layers around, we have Google Maps now, you draw layers around that core. So you have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. And what happens is as you go out layer by layer, price per square foot goes down significantly. It drops off quite a bit. So inside the city, let's say you're downtown Austin, you're looking at $800, $900 a square foot, right? Absolutely insane. You start going out, say 7 minutes, it drops down to $600 a square foot. You go out another 20 minutes, it drops down to $350 a square foot. You go again, it's now at $150 a square foot. The challenge though with our generation right now, or generations, is that we want to live inside the city to be right next to our favorite restaurants, our favorite gym, our friends, our job and everything. And we don't want to make that 30, 45 minute commute. But the difference is between $150 to $200 a square foot versus $1,000 a square foot. That's the difference between you owning a space and being able to build equity and cash flow versus living in debt for the rest of your life. And so the onion strategy is essentially finding the right layer that aligns with your financial situation and where you are in life, and then slowly hopscotching your way in towards the core as you develop financial maturity and the financial ability to actually purchase the more expensive prime real estate. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Yeah, I just want to buy what I can afford. Is that you make the money in the process of going through that journey of buying more and more properties as you get closer to the core.
You're basically putting a really nice name to what I think a lot of people do on accident. I remember there was this guy that I used to work with at my ad agency. He was an editor, and I think he made pretty good money. I mean, I would say he probably made 180 to 140. Okay, it's a pretty big range, but it'll make sense here in a second. And I remember he told me he had a house in Hermosa Beach, which is kind of in between LA and Orange County. Really sought out a neighborhood. And he was like, yeah, I think it's worth $1.7 million. Now, if you math out how much money you need to buy a $1.7 million house, it's usually a lot more than $140,000, right? 80 to 140, that range that I gave you. And I remember just being like, this was me, and I was making at that time 100K. And I remember just being like, whoa, that's so crazy. Like, he's got this house that's $1.7 million. And I was like, how did you do it, man? Like, you work at an ad agency. And he's like, well, before that, I lived in Redondo Beach, and I bought that house 20 years ago for $400,000. It appreciated to 1.3. So we had a lot of equity. We sold it, took that $1 million, and then put it all into the $1.7 million house. So his mortgage on it was like, I don't know, 400,000, 500,000, somewhere in there. And I just remember being like, whoa, he's so lucky. He bought when it was cheap. But I feel like he didn't do that. He wasn't master planning that. He didn't have some grand scheme. He was just kind of like, yeah, like we had this house and we sold it and took that money and put it into the new house. And I feel like that pretty much sums up the typical American experience. What do you think?
You're 100% right. That's how I started off when I didn't know much. Is I took the equity from my first place and I leveraged it for my second place. Well, actually it was cash flow and equity into my second place. Did it for my third place, fourth place. This is just applying more of a specific name and intent behind it.
Yeah.
Like exactly what you're saying is that over time, when you start building up those properties, say 2 or 3 properties in the 5 years, is you can accumulate several hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity and tens of thousands of dollars in income on a monthly basis if you implement the right strategies. What I was going to say earlier that it gets really interesting is not just people think about like city cores like Austin, San Francisco, New York, whatever, Chicago. But what ends up happening is that you can create cores in other hot spots. So think about like lakes, mountains, rivers, where people like to vacation and visit, right? Now you have these overlapping, not just the cores, but you have these overlapping layers. And if you can strategically buy in those layers that are overlapping, you now have 2 choices in 2 or 3 years is you can move closer to either one of those cores. In some areas, there's like 4 or 5 cores and that are all overlapping.
So let me ask you this. Whenever you kind of intentionally do the onion strategy, is the idea that, because there's a thing we talk about on the channel called the sneaky rental strategy, and that is like buying a house for 3.5% down, living in it, and then buying another house for 3% or 5% down, turning the first house into a rental strategy. Is that strategy at play here? Like, is it meant to be a strategy in which you're a primary owner, hopscotching to the next thing? Or is the strategy more from an investment standpoint in buying a little bit farther out from a city and just kind of building your investment portfolio that way?
Great question. So it all depends on the intention and where the individual is financially. So some of our folks, they already own 10 homes. They make really good money. They're in their 50s or 60s, but they don't have enough money to buy in, let's say, New York City, right? They have good money, but not that much money. So then we're going outside of the city and we're doing the same type of strategy. And then we slowly start working our way in. But that's going to be a pure investment. For a lot of our folks who are beginning, though, it is going to be their primary because they can still leverage really low down payments, like what you just said. And they can use it to hopscotch into a bigger home or bigger property. But what we like to do is we don't go off the policy or the strategy of one door, one property. We like to create multiple income streams off that one property. So we have a tax advantage, we have equity creation and appreciation, and then we also have cash flow. And when you add those three together, we're talking about a substantial amount of money, usually several times more than what our members or whatever clients are making on an annual salary basis. So yes, it plays in both.
I want to clarify the sort of, you said you can kind of create these other cores and choose where you want to go. Mm-hmm. Let's maybe contextualize this in the world of New York, because I actually think that this is a prime example for me. So New York, always quote unquote expensive. I mean, it is. I don't know why I have to quote unquote it, but it's always been pretty expensive. And so what a lot of people did was they started moving out to Brooklyn, and then they started moving out to Williamsburg. There are these kind of neighborhoods outside of New York that would have been maybe that outer layer. Mm-hmm. And then now Williamsburg, Brooklyn, again, I know that they're in that same wheelhouse, but they are now super popular, very expensive. Mm-hmm. And that would be the core for someone else because now those places are arguably unobtainable, yes. Right? And so now I guess people's decision are like, okay, which way do we build from there? Is that a pretty good way of thinking about it?
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. I mean, New York's a great example just because of what's gone through the last 100 years. But yeah, these cores, whether it's, you can take obviously a major city to kind of look at the result of what happens after, 2 or 3 generations. But we look at smaller cities, maybe like Little Rock, Arkansas, it's a good size. These relatively smaller cities that are nowhere near the size of like an Austin, a Dallas, a Houston, a New York, San Francisco. And eventually they have names for those areas. The counties, the departments, they call them the urban growth boundary. They have this planned out. And usually that urban growth boundary is, think of like a halo that circles around the city core. And that's where they have plans to grow and expand into that area within the next 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. And they're dumping money into that specific halo. So not only can we create like some assumptions and strategies around it, but we can actually see what the city is planning too. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Those areas, if you go back probably 2 generations, 1 generation, those areas of New York was probably, I shouldn't say super cheap, but way more affordable.
Relatively speaking. Hey, by the way, if you liked this conversation, I've got good news for you. There's way more where that came from. If you want to watch the whole thing, click right here.